Hola, bienvenidos todos a Primavera Pro 2022. Hi, welcome everyone to Primavera Pro. Raves, like many other things, are traditional rituals that are not the heritage of Western culture. Let's soak up the knowledge of the expert Chenta Tsai, Gabber Modus Operandi, Rui Ho, and Eastern margins to participate in these new ceremonial rites before they become ancestral. Thank you so much.
Wait, is Rijo with us? Well, hi, my name is Chenta, and I will be your host for today. In today's panel, we invited these four amazing panelists to talk about new non-Westernized forms of rave from East and Southeast Asian focus. And we will talk about their projects and works in relation to the potentialities and the futurities of raves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to each and every panelist. The first are Gabber Modus Operandi, who are the most dangerous hardcore unit from Balinese underground club scene. Hailing from the punk, noise, and metal background, Gabber Modus Operandi push funkot, dangdut, koplo, jatilang, gamelan, breakcore, and gabber into an extraordinary distinctive sound and attitude. Then we've got Riho on the screen, projected, who's a Shanghai-based Chinese artist who has been making buzzes with heavy and playful DJ sets throughout the European experimental underground scene, as well as in China throughout the past few years. After releasing a series of EPs on Genome 6.66 MBP and Objects Ltd, their debut album was released on UK label Planet Mu. They have performed at 3HD Festival, Les Urbanis, CTM Music Festival, Boiler Room, Hard Dance Series, and many more, which is an amazing set, by the way. Thank you so much for joining. And then we've got Lumi, who is the co-founder of Eastern Margins, a collective dedicated to showcasing music from the margins of East and Southeast Asia and its diaspora through parties, live streams, and label releases. Born in Nanjing, China, and raised in the UK, he's been putting on shows and DJing for just over a decade. Eastern Margins seeks to draw upon those experiences to build a community where we're free and comfortable to explore how our culture and heritage can inform our creative practices. So I'd like to start off by asking Lumi, how did the idea of Eastern Margins come about, and where did the necessity to create spaces of our own come from?
Yeah, I think Eastern Margins was born out of a really, really basic desire at the time when we started in 2018, just to see more representation, more people that looked like us in the experimental and underground club scene in the UK and in London. But I think over time, it's something that we've learned to really evolve beyond into something further beyond just representation. I think Eastern Margins now is really a community for people to connect and to understand more about the East and Southeast Asian cultures that they feel affiliated with, and for it to be a space for people to feel comfortable to learn and kind of to learn from their mistakes and to grow upon that. And I think one thing I wanted to play was this video that I think really exemplifies what Eastern Margins is about, and I'll talk a little bit about the video as well.
Yeah. 明かりの悪い奴ばっかがたまってんね見せろやっぱ何にもない何にもないけど濡れてごまかすそれでもそれなりに回る世界空気ってバー泣かせないあの日の俺らのまんまエレファントミヤ人みたいさえ渡る俺らは軽く国境を越えてちゃうシルクロードベルベットを信じような目の前
So this is a 2020 event, no? That you organized with Keep Hush Live?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a Japanese artist called Toji who came down to perform this Keep Hush live stream broadcasting in a basement. And I think you can tell from that video, like the energy, the latent energy of that room. To have this artist come from Japan, sampling kind of like breaks, kind of having Jersey influences in a basement full of basically like East and Southeast Asians is like exactly what we care about Eastern Margins. It's like invigorating to see other people who look like us in that space, exploring music from across different parts of the culture. So I think that's what Eastern Margins has started to evolve into.
Yeah. And well, I wanted to ask, if it's not very intrusive, how was the process of organizing this rave, catered especially towards East and Southeast Asians? And what limits or difficulties, if any, did you encounter to create this space?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really keenly aware of, especially as Diaspora, is the need not to fall into the stereotypes that we try and escape from. Because I think it's something, especially for East and Southeast Asian diaspora, it's really, really easy to, consume the Western media and to consume the stereotypes that you're trying to subvert and buy into that. So I'm really keenly aware with Eastern Margins that sometimes by creating a space specifically for East and Southeast Asians, we need to be more acutely aware that we don't end up reinforcing the stereotypes that we're trying to break away from. At a simple level, a lot of us in Eastern Margins, and I've talked about it with you two, it's we like anime and we like certain animes to do with that. But at the same time, that's a very, very stereotypical representation of East and Southeast Asian culture in the West. So it's something that we have to tread carefully and with nuance around. So I think that is a real limit of what we can do in the diaspora that I think actually maybe for artists like Reho and GMO, it's a different experience when you're not based in the diaspora and you're actually based in East and Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So following Lumi, I'd like to ask Gabber Modus Operandi a similar question, no? Talking about the differences of creating culture, of creating spaces between diaspora and non-diaspora, no? It's funny how we also experience the westernization of these spaces in Asia. In an interview in AQMB, you both talked about the phenomenon of tourist electronic music, which I found very interesting, and I quote, something that you said, which was, why is music always serving tourism? Why is every club only presenting overseas DJs rather than local DJs, where there's actually equal knowledge in there? Why is the music always for serving, never talking about another idea? So first I'd like to ask, what is tourist electronic music? Que me parece fascinante, I think it's amazing. And then secondly, how did you build, from the Gabber's Modus Operandi project, spaces that don't put tourists in the center, spaces where you don't adapt your work to accommodate a Western white audience, but rather want to respond to the local scene and Indonesian subculture?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are Gabber Modus, and then when the question you asking us about what is tourist music, actually we don't have any specifically, but as a term, you living in Bali, and this is always being a tourist destination, and always this utopia of the heaven of earth, something, and it's affecting, of course, in our scene, because suddenly Bali it's become the cheapest version of Ibiza. And then this attitude of people, overseas people is coming to us with their power currency, suddenly they have this kind of power to, driving or this just tell and presenting sometime what is the Bali scene it's.
Yeah, if you check the Bali techno, which is another techno that we know, and the problem is it happened for so long that whatever happens in Bali is synthesizing whatever happens in the West. And people don't realize the term dance music itself. What is dance music? If we talk about club, what is dance music? What's dance because Bali, I think the last couple of places in Earth that traditional dance still works well there. You can go 1 kilometer away from the clubs and there is a people dancing traditional music. But that 1 kilometer away never translated to the club. People feel inferior to dance like this or like this. It needs to be like if you go to club, it feels like you're going to some embassy, some European embassy country. You know, it's like it changed and it becomes not relevant for us. It's not even safe. It's not relevant anymore. You know, like the way not only the music, just synthesizing whatever happens, and the worst thing about synthesizing, we always have the last one. So whatever happens in Europe, let's say, oh, tech house was big like last year, and then we're gonna have it in the last end of the age of this trend, and everyone goes, eh, but done, it's done, and then it's become really not relevant for us.
Yeah. But do you notice like a very big divide? For example, in Taiwan, for example, in the drag scene especially, I feel like there's a huge influence on tourist culture and like United States culture, no? In that sense, like for example, and I do notice that. How do you say like? That difference, that culture difference, you know, like instead of lip syncing to Jolin Tsai, you know, or they are lip syncing to RuPaul. So that's why I think it's very interesting what you were talking about. And also you describe your music as post-LA, and I thought it was very, very, I really like the idea. Would you like to explain that, post-LA?
That's manifest of post-LA. Well, we should describing what is ally is. Ally is acronym for anak layangan, which is in our language mean son of the kite. I don't know why they call it.
Like playing kite.
Kite, you know, someone's like playing kite because they have like under the suns, they dyeing their hair naturally because the sun. So all these kids, actually, ally it's kids from rural of Indonesia is not living in the center, suddenly have access to the internet, access to the global. So they want to be part of the global. So they're dyeing their hair, they do, they listen, like, you know, they have like this emo hair, things like that. And then in the term of the city, which is like centralizing people, allies become like really bad. You know, like people coming from rural try to being city people. Yeah. You know, those kind of things, you know, like, so in the term of ally itself is already, let's say it's bad or negative, or like always like people living in the city, point of this ally culture is low culture. So it's a big phenomenon of early 2000 because the internet access. And we just sitting around and then just like talking about like what is actually subculture in Indonesia is. Well, for us is ally is the authentic of the culture of the subculture of Indonesia, because this affecting engaging internet, engaging the fashion, engaging the creativity, and engaging the always like kind of standing on the DIY kind of spirit. And so we just thinking about like since 2000 until now what it could be post ally could be, and Gabber Modus Operandi could be offer this manifest to the global scene, because like we really want to standing on our own subculture. We don't, if we're standing on this like punk rock subculture, it's gonna be coming from UK again, it's gonna be copycat again, or we're gonna standing on this rave scene, it's gonna be copycat of this Berliner again. So what we want to offer to this, and then like we're standing on this post ally, which is like doesn't even exist.
And the post ally actually happens in each of Asia, Southeast Asia and Asia. Like it have different term. Like I think in Philippines, I don't remember the name, but mostly they listen to Budot music, and then in Thailand they listen to Electro Molam. I don't know if you see in the TikTok, they do this really weird dancing.
The ones like do the
sayor dance. But I think the best part about all of this this culture is they don't really asking for confirmation. They don't really care about like, oh, that's MTV kind of coolness. Oh, that's the Western coolness. They do exactly what they can do, what they have, because in the end they do with the scooters, you know. They paint the scooter like really crazy and then like dancing really crazy and doing TikTok, you know. And I think it's really liberating. For us, it's really liberating, that kind of movement.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to put a fragment of Sankakala from the 2021 reissue album, Buximax, si es audio 1. You have to see them, they're going to play today. No. Well, in the same interview, you talk about Buximax as, and I quote, a statement of being bored with this tourist and cloud music or tourism electronic music. We are living in the subculture, but in a way, we're still surrounded by this identity of what is Indonesian subculture, what you were saying before, and this imagination of what is the future of rave. So now my question is, what do you all imagine the future of rave to be like? As well as, is it possible to create 100% non-Westernized forms of rave, in the sense that your influences, a lot of our influences are Western in reality?
Well, for us, what is rave again? I mean, like, if rave is just people gathering and like being possessed with the repetition music, we did it like 300 years ago.
And
just
100
like,
years, not even
maybe like
100 years.
Exactly. Or we get discount of the years anyway. Like so. The Western is just like, I think rave definition in the Western is more like capitalizing. It's just like demand of the economy and demand of the drugs and culture. And we did it without drugs.
Yeah.
We did it just, it's, like we just like, someone's playing gamelan and like put a repetition and someone like bring the flower and then shaman like whispering to our ears, and just like suddenly we just like pooh in another dimension, new galaxy, intergalactic planetary.
And then maybe like what we can do, like at least starting from a second album, we start to retuning our sounds into traditional tuning. Like we do a lot of like let's using like 5 or 6 notes from gamelan or like traditional flutes, but really don't sample it. Just like how to play like 5 notes, repeating each other, stuff like that, and then and kind of like changing the order of the music suddenly, and then slowly if we got a question about like what is the future of rave, for us like simple, like if we see people start to dance like this, because Southeast Asia a lot of involvement with the hands, like if start to like doing this or like doing this, and then the dance is not only like we don't really want to change the techno dance or like the Gabber dance, but if it's more colorful, if it's more accommodate to a lot of people can dance the way they want or dance the way they related to, or whatever calling from their DNA, then I think it's worked,
Yeah. Well, on a similar note, I'd like to ask Riho if there is a predominance in China of spaces catered towards tourists, as we were talking before, and what are the similarities and differences of seeking for non-Westernized spaces in Shanghai, where you are based now, and non-Westernized spaces in Berlin, where you were based?
So I think comparing to, for example, Bali, Shanghai, or like other cities in China are still kind of different, especially during the past 2 years of the pandemic, since the Chinese government has imposed really, really strong anti-COVID policies, basically shutting out all the foreign tourists in China. So for the 2 years that I'm back in China, basically, I don't think there's like a club scene that's really catered to the Western tourists in this sense. And there were kind of like a really significant change in demographics in clubbings, as like the young Chinese kids are growing to fall in love with clubbing. So for example, in Shanghai, there are like a lot of new clubs opening. But also kind of like, it's kind of like the new hit thing right now. So a lot of the hot monies are really trying to get on the market to like open up new clubs, and then attracting like the club goers to go to these different events. So yeah, it's more like an internal thing that's happening right now. And now you go to parties. I mean, it's like a really big change to comparing to like 4 or 5 years ago, when there's like definitely more foreigners that you see at clubbings. I would explain it as like it wasn't really such strong entertainment traditions in the Chinese scene, as like most of the ways of like consuming music would be going to karaoke's and, you know, hanging out with friends in bars and stuff like that. I think that's like a similar vibe in Taiwan, where you must know better. And then, but now there's like a more and more like a growing interest in going clubbing from like the college kids, or like the younger generation, like the Chinese kids in like the metropolitans. So yeah, I don't think it's catered to tourists, but you can still see like the very strong like Western influence in the club scenes, where like most of the music they're playing are like from the Western, or like the imitation of the Western style. Yeah, and then comparing to Berlin, well, Berlin is still really, I mean, it's in Germany and it's in Europe, and it's definitely very Westernized. And then it's kind of difficult to navigate to find all these places with like non-Westernized space. You will have initiatives of like POC organizations, or like POC friendly space. There are like when there are like stronger political discussions involving in like clubbings and stuff. But it's difficult to navigate, as in Berlin you still have this problem of like the tourists from all over Europe and even like all over the world that goes to Berlin because of its clubbing scene. And then it's like local people or local German people, and then like the immigrants from the local German people. For example, like the Turkish community, who are really, really big in Berlin, but then in general doesn't really have any ideas where they go out and in the nightlife, for example, because there's like a really, really big gap. I think because of the language barrier, and also because of like the club scene. You have these divisions of the general German population and the expert scene, or like the expert electronic music scene in Berlin. So it takes a while to really navigate, and really depends on what you want to look for in Berlin, because it does have a lot to offer, but like mostly is still quite Western centered, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. Well, now I'd like us to hear fragments of Wings of Light from your previous EP. Audio 2, por favor. Muchas gracias. It's such an amazing EP. No, so, well, we just listened to Wings of Light from the EP In Pursuit of the Sun. And it's inspired by the famous Chinese folklore where Guafu, who's a giant, chases the sun from east to west. And to quench his thirst, he drains the Yellow River and the Wei River. And to no avail, he dies of dehydration. And in the description of your album, you say that you were very inspired by a lot of the rave genres and blending them with Chinese influences, trying to demonstrate the spirit of reaching high and reaching for the impossible. So my question was, how was your process of blending rave genres with Chinese influences?
Basically, it wasn't really like a process of that I wanted to bring in the elements, specifically these elements. Because if you listen to my previous two EP, one, it's more like a deconstructed club mixed with Chinese influence, and the other one would like be blending a lot of like ambient elements and trance elements in it as well. So it really has to do with me only, I mean, when I was creating music, I wasn't really thinking about like how the audience is going to perceive it. It's mostly about me trying to express myself. So this happened, I mean, this EP happens when I was DJing a lot, and I was playing a lot of rave genre at the time when I was playing a lot in Berlin and all over Europe. So I had this idea of like creating this really simple EP, kind of like blending a lot of like the elements that's from my culture. I mean, yeah, because like the mostly the traditional Chinese elements are mostly melodic when you have this very specific type of way of composing the Chinese sounds, like the tones and the instruments and then the melodics. And then I think it would be interesting to just combine it with like the rave music genre that I was also kind of discovering myself at the time. Yeah, and then I was also interested in kind of like producing an EP like this to see when I'm performing it live in a club space, no matter if it's in a Western club space or in China or in anywhere else, to see what people could react to it. Because I think it's rather interesting to see this as like something new. I wouldn't like necessarily like identify it with like whatever genre, to put out the work there to see how people will interact with it. Yeah.
Well, I'm very curious, how do they interact in China, for example, or in other parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia? And how do they usually interact with your music, especially with this EP in Europe, for example?
When I was in Europe, I mean, when I'm playing DJ sets, I usually would like blend these tunes into the DJ sets, and then when I'm playing a live set, then it would be like a full-on live set with all the music that I produce. I mean, it's been perceived pretty well, and then also I have like a lot of like comparisons with of my music to like Western composers or like DJs and stuff. So yeah, I feel. I mean, I'm really, really glad that it get perceived as like a more contemporary versions of like a Chinese electronic music or whatever it is. Because the last label, I mean, not that I don't want to be associated with it, but I just feel like whenever I just kind of avoid to go into producing word music, for example, because I find it's a term that's kind of like really categorized when the Western audience wouldn't want to try to understand where it's come from, and then would just kind of like generalize this whole bunch of like genres that's quite different from each other to put it in the word music category. And then when I was playing it in China, I mean, definitely the crowd would like understand the references of where it's coming from. Sometimes it's kind of like interesting because people would be like, oh, this like sounds really familiar, sometimes even like cheesy, because it's like for them it would be like music elements that they hear from like TVs or like a really old like childhood memory where they hear it from radios, but not like in a very contemporary way. So yeah, it was interesting to hear all of this and to see how people react to it. But I think definitely it's causing reactions from people to be like, oh, like actually you can blend these elements together and it's kind of like creating something new, which no matter if it's like weird for some people or it's like new to some people, but it's definitely not what's already on the menu, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask if all the panel, if in order to create a more decolonial, non-Westernized rave music, it's important to deconstruct our modes of production, o sea, be it by using other forms of tuning, be it decolonizing our softwares, our DAWs, our influences, languages. I would like to ask the whole panel. So maybe you could start, Gabber.
The funny stuff when we start doing Gabber Modus Operandi, in the same time we obsess with the hardcore music and we do a lot of, both of us club kids. And every time we come back from clubs, we always end up in this small restaurant, like ghetto warung, we call it warung.
What?
It's just like a ghetto space, and then they always play like ghetto music, you know, all this like grassroots music. We call it dangdut, you know, this alay people music. So the fact that we come from listening techno and then we're listening to this kind of grassroots music at the same time, and it happened constantly, it was kind of like, oh, it's kind of makes sense. And then I was doing production and kind of stuck because obviously I need confirmation how it sounds like proper techno, you know. I was really close to gamelan master. There is one gamelan master that really doing, like he teach me something and like, oh, we just play 5 notes, he said, but by 32 people. And then like, oh, interesting. Like a 5 notes, 32 people, or like 10 notes by 24 people, different instrument. So from that I start to using a couple of techniques to just using the traditional tuning, but putting like a strictly, it shouldn't sound like traditional. The tuning needs to be traditional, but the sounds, I want it out from, let's say, virus, you know, the synthesizer, or like sounds like Juno, sounds like a contemporary, and then surprisingly, it sounds weird in the beginning, but like we always joking like one our achievement in club for us is if there is a people get possessed, and I think like 1 year ago it's happening. Some guy suddenly like dancing and then suddenly become tiger like.
Wow.
Like, yay!
Yeah, like this tiger, you know, he is possessed already.
Yeah, I mean, for us, basically, like, we really don't want to even think about decolonizing. Because the term, it's already like, it's English, it's already making us thinking in Western idea. Like I was talking to him just like 10 minutes ago. Southeast Asia language is so fucked up that we don't really talk to each other because it's so completely different. Like everyone have their own things. Like unless you really
their own problem and then
aesthetic. We share a lot of stuff.
I think it's like the point why we starting actually. It's the way we celebrating what we have. We don't even thinking about decolonization or this sounds contemporary or whoever. Like the first what we did, like we want to celebrating what we have, and we want to dealing with like being peace with ourselves.
Yeah,
as like since like living in a post-colonial mentality, we always thinking like there is someone inferiority than us. So this we want to make peace with us, like and celebrate what we have.
And we celebrate a lot. Like somebody die, we celebrate.
Exactly.
People dance. Somebody born, people dance. And then the concept of celebrating and party was so big to get replaced by kind of like Western idea of rave or dance music, and to be not related to it. I think it's really important.
True.
Yeah. What about Lumi? What do you think?
Yeah, I think what you said about celebrating what we have and what we have already, like, really resonates with me. So, like, beyond the idea of, like, decolonizing, like, production methods or ways of making music, one thing that's, like, at the front of my mind is, like, the environment which we create music, consume music, and listen to music. Like you were saying earlier about, like, what is rave? Like, rave, for me, sometimes is just like a convenient way of branding some very like common, universal, like human experiences. Like rave is kind of like this conception of what it means at its core to like gather people and have like a common experience. And like when you think of rave, you think of like, oh, it's got to be a warehouse, it's got to be dark. But like when you abstract the things that make a rave so great, like the communal experience, like, I get that in, like, a restaurant backroom, Like, I get that on, like, a roadside stall with, like, all my friends. It's that same level of, like, communion and that same level of coming together. And it's also, like, somewhere, like, I experience a lot of music as well. Like, so kind of along the lines of what you're saying, those, like, post-ally kind of, like, genres. Like, one genre that I really love is, like, Wiener House and Wiener Hai from, like, Vietnam. And like the main A&R source for that music, the way I discover that music is like the local like hot pot joint down the road from where I go, right?
Exactly.
And then like the owner is blaring out Wiener Hai from the speakers, and like I don't know what it is, so I go up and it's like, what is this? But that's like when you abstract it out from like where it's happening and the space, that is exactly like all the same things as what people think of as rave. You're connecting with someone about music, you're having a communal experience, you're kind of emotionally bonding over it. So for me, like the idea of like decolonization is almost, I'd want to like shift it a bit more to kind of like celebrating what we have and not trying to force it under the rubric of like existing more Western notions and just celebrating what we already have in our cultures that taps into those like same energies, same power, basically.
Yeah. No, I just realized I haven't asked you what you interpret as raves yet. And yeah. So that's why I'm going to ask Riho. So for you, what is a rave?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what all of you said before. I think like the communal experience in the club space is very important for raving. Basically, like the physical experience of like bunch of people celebrating together or just kind of like enjoying the music together, the body experience of it. I think it's like the perfect example of raving. So yeah, like to this question, I think Yeah, like I mean, playing for a Western audience, for example, when I was in Berlin, is definitely very much different than playing for a crowd that's in China. Like the reception of my music would vary because of that. So I think the question of like decolonizing the process of producing music is kind of inevitable in this sense, as like the whole of our contemporary music or electronic music, the whole structure will like be built on a Western standard. It is quite a difficult question or complicated question to be tackled on. There's a lot of struggles in this sense when you're not really from the Western society, or when you're in a diaspora, for example. So I think at the current state, it would be difficult to completely abandon all of these tools that we have. For example, like DAOs or like influences or like language or like the weight of productions, because that is the structure that we are basing on right now for contemporary music. Of course, music is like a way of bringing people together. So the end goal is to really like to celebrate with your community. So when we create this kind of spaces, it's a part of the decolonization. But it's still kind of complicated to when you see from the whole production process to this whole thing. Yeah, so as I said, like if you completely abandon the process, sometimes you will end up being receptive as like the word music, for example, which would be has very little to do with the electronic music in this sense. I mean, it is kind of changing right now because of the internet culture and all these different scenes that's also gaining like really global attentions throughout the or like all around the world. But we are still kind of like living in this structure, and I think it would be still taking some time for us to find out the way to really like decolonize all this structure and tools. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, pues, linking to what we were talking about, and also what Lumi brought up before, I wanted to link it to something that you said in an interview with Electric Soul that I thought it was very interesting. And you were talking about recognizing Eastern margin status as outsiders, and you're wary of telling stories in an authentic and honest way, contextualizing culture without either exoticizing it or self-orientalizing ourselves. And I wanted to quote something very interesting that you said. You said, we don't get a free pass to put on this culture just because we're Asian. We also have to do a lot of hard work to understand it, to contextualize it, to educate ourselves. So this is a question for Lumi and to the panelists. What are the differences and the common grounds of creating Southeast Asian spaces, music, etc., being from the diaspora and not being from the diaspora, no? O sea, I would like to ask that.
Yeah, I think being from the diaspora and being based outside of East and Southeast Asia, it's kind of like a cultural identity crisis that everyone in the diaspora goes through around what your relationship is to the culture, to the heritage of your parents or your grandparents. And I think it took me a lot of time to get comfortable with the fact that diasporic culture is not and does not have to be the same as the culture in East and Southeast Asia, or for myself, like in China. So to be comfortable with that, but also to realize the corollary of that is that I don't necessarily have any greater credibility or insights to tell a story about what rave culture is like in Indonesia, what culture is like in Shanghai, just because I happen to be like ethnically Chinese. Like in a lot of ways, right? Like what you were saying earlier, Cass, like in actual East and Southeast Asia, a lot of people don't talk across borders because of language and culture, right? But because I'm in the West, because I'm diaspora, there is this like grand concept of Asian, where it's like somehow like there's the idea that I understand like what goes on in Indonesia, or I understand what goes on in Thailand. But really, I don't have a clue. Like I have to like learn about it.
Yeah.
I have to like geek out about it. So it's little things like I was really inspired by this this project that some friends of ours did in Vietnam. The Gai Collective did. So they're like a fantastic like rave collective, like very hard dance type stuff based in Saigon, and they were telling this story basically about kind of this type of like sweet vendor, and in Vietnam it's called I'm gonna mispronounce it, but I think it's called like Kio Kio, and it's a kind of like a sweet vendor that will go around late night, and then in exchange for selling sweets, they'll sing traditional Vietnamese folk music called bolero, which is in itself like tied all the way back to kind of like 30s like communist music from like Latin America. But it's like these kinds of stories that it's so hard to know and so hard to understand unless you're based in those countries. You see it day to day. And for us, like especially for us in Eastern margins, like we have to like be really careful that we don't end up exotifying it in the process. It's not just something to be like consumed by an English language speaking audience, because it's actually the day to day of some people. So yeah, I'd be really curious to hear like Reiho, like GMO, like your perspectives as like non-diaspora.
From diaspora, I think the most important thing is back again, celebrating the idea. I mean, there is a structure that we need to embrace, like simple stuff. My grandpa don't know about chromatic.
Yeah,
So-
chromatic lady gaga.
Chromatic, like do, re, mi, fa, sol.
मैं
like
सीमा
12
वाले.
notes.
Oh, I'm such a fag.
Google
Sorry.
Chrome doesn't
No, I mean, like
chromatic.
like my grandpa don't know how to play guitar and piano, so the music that he got wasn't really based on major or minor key. And I was even asked him what is sad and happy for them, because it's easy for us that listening to Western music or Western based chromatic music, like if you want to be sad, you go minor.
Yeah.
If you want to, but what is it if you don't live in that concept? And that's not even 100 years.
Yeah.
All these, and that's what we call pelok and slendro. This is like the old tunings from Java. But also there's a 600 language across Indonesia, 600 language that nobody can talk to each other because it's completely different language. It's not even dialect.
Wow.
It's completely different language. That's one, like we, like for us, we need to admit that like we're not also represent the Indonesia. We specifically doing Bali and Denpasar kind of things with our what we have, you know. And then also I love the technicality out of it. Like I think like most people also, this is pretty trivia that people don't really realize, that if you live in the equator, the idea of rave inside the room is non-exist. So you don't really party indoor because you have tropical time most of the time. So when we do celebrating, most of us playing outside. So you do traditional dance or like a party, a lot of us doing it outside. By doing it outside, the way you perceive music also different. A lot of things you cannot have reverb, you know, or delay. You don't, because there is no reflection to do that. So it's also shaping the way musically. Sometimes like because when we make our first EP, like my friends are like, oh, it's so bad because it doesn't have reverb, but the other friends are like, no, it like it needs to be like that. It needs to be punchy and direct because It just the sounds come from like if this is the sound source, the dancer needs to be around it, and it's kind of like omni. Instead of you have like a amplification that there is a speaker back in the back and then DJ, and then that kind of stuff we try to embrace also, like, oh, we couldn't just, let's say, using a DJ culture and then just put it in the bunker, stuff like that. We also want to embrace this, like how to really knows what our previous generation doing, so we can know what's the alternate future that we want to do,
And Riho, what do you think about the common grounds, similarities, differences between the spaces and music created by the diaspora and the non-diaspora scene?
I think a very interesting thing that Lumi mentioned is that like we don't we don't normally have like the credential to represent other cultures inside of this Southeast Asian culture. For example, like my experience with music has been really, really different than what you have been talk about. That I have never experienced any outdoor dance events in my traditional culture in China. So what happened is right now in China, I think like the audience, you can see like you can go to like club space and then you can see like all these younger Chinese generations who's going to clubs, which seems like okay, like the communal space is like quite decolonized, that you get this community of like young club kids who are all Chinese, and then but then the music that we're playing are Westernized, like the Western music, or like the Chinese imitations of it. Like the Chinese producers who are producing it are still producing it based on the Western formulas, which has to do with the Chinese music culture in general throughout the history. I feel like a lot of like the dance elements of it has lost. Like my parents' generation would never go to like a traditional dance events which plays traditional Chinese music. Like the Chinese pop songs that were playing or that were really popular in my younger years, like the best way to experience it is going to a karaoke, which I find it really different than a lot of like the Southeast Asian country, for example, which I feel like there's like a stronger dance elements to the traditional music of their culture. That which I'm like completely I'm like really not familiar with because I haven't really experienced it myself. So yeah, I think the common ground would be to learn how to celebrate your traditional music, but at the same time the differences are really huge for people who are in the diaspora or even outside of the diaspora, when you're from different regions of like East or Southeast Asia. I've never been to Taiwan, so I can't really speak for it, but I guess there's like a similarity to the Chinese, like the Shanghai scene, for example. I don't know if you can share an insight on that as well.
Well, I am a complete mess though, because I grew up, o sea, I was born in Taiwan and I came here when de repente this is therapy. No, o sea, and so that's why I have a lot of identity crisis in that sense, where I do feel comfort not belonging neither here nor there, and to embrace contradiction and celebration, what we were talking about. So right now, I do, o sea, it's true that everyone was striving towards, like there's a natural notion to want to approximate Chinese culture from ignorance in reality, because I haven't grown in that culture. But I think that little by little I'm embracing that part of a contradiction where I allow myself to be fluid, in the sense that I am also Spanish. I grew up listening to Las Supremas de Móstoles, and I also grew up listening to John and Tsai. So it's finding like a balance between these things. Yeah. Well, so we have only 3 minutes left, and before, yeah, I am a bit shocked. So I'm going to do like let's do the questions, because I remember that you had questions for the panel, and Lumi also had questions, and if you also have any questions for everyone, just let us know. Maybe Lumi, you can start by asking.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to hear everyone on the panel. So my question is, do you think, or do you feel a sense of obligation to tell the story of our own cultures to a global stage? Or do you think it's more important to build that locally and let the world discover us?
For me, I think standing on locally, and just like for Gabber Modus Operandi, we always want to stand out how the homes look like when we presenting our music. How's the way we move, the way we party, the way our melody. We really want to stand out with that first. And well, let's the globe like discover us or whoever. But like we just want to like embracing and then being being home,
peace.
being peace and being peace with ourselves again, because like we have like this kind of post-colonial mentality, you know.
Yeah.
And then like right now in this internet era and everything, we just want to being home, you know, and then like just presenting home how it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what you think, Kas.
Yeah, I think home. Home is like a really concept for everyone, like from diaspora and for us that still live there. But the best part is, I think, like for this kind of things, sometimes people stuck also from the narrative in the past, and sometimes like really put so much effort in the clingy part, like you do that in the we colonize us now. Let's go. let's think about the future. You know, like if there is no space, just make one. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is interesting experience about like when we playing in Uganda in Africa. Someone just like some local guys hugging Kas and just says like, "Oh guys, I'm feeling home." Like so, his home is not just like you where you from, not where you base, where you raised, wherever.
Yeah.
It's just a feeling.
Yeah, totally. And what about you, Ruijo?
Yeah, I think for me, I have like a similar. I wouldn't say it's like identity crisis, but like a multi identical questions or like problems that I need to be expressing, like similar to you, Chantal, and because other than being Eastern Asian or from the diaspora of it, we're also queer person or like trans person, and then I feel like my music, I would want to like blend all of this identity together. So no matter if it's like should I bring my vision to like a global sense or like keeping it local. I think that's all fluid. Like the audience are all fluid. It really depends on what kind of stories that I want to tell with my music. So yeah, I think I do think it's a responsibility to like bring it to like a larger audience to be able to see who we are as who we are. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Totally. No, well, we ran out of time. So if anyone has any questions, we can talk outside. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for coming.
Terima kasih.
This is such an honor. O sea, we are.
Thank you.
Estamos
Thank you,
bendecidas,
Chenta.
las
Thank
cosas
you.
como son. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Rijo, Gabber,
kasih.
Modus, Operandi. Thank you, Lumi. Pues nada,
Dari tadi. Gue pakai kacamata dari tadi.
lo preguntamos ahora.